Sometimes the smallest decision on the hardest day can change your entire future. Hannah Brooks did not know that truth, yet as she stepped out of the Maple Street diner just after 10 o'clock on a cold October night, rain poured from the dark sky in heavy sheets, turning the parking lot into a sea of shimmering reflections. Her feet ached from a double shift, and exhaustion settled deep into her shoulders. She pulled her worn jacket tighter around herself and glanced at her phone. There was a message from her 9-year-old daughter, Chloe. "Good night, Mom. Do not forget my school project tomorrow." Hannah smiled despite her fatigue. Chloe was the reason she kept going through every challenge life placed in front of her. Raising a child alone had never been easy. Bills seemed to arrive faster than paychecks. Unexpected expenses always appeared at the worst possible times. Yet every evening, when she saw Chloe's smile, Hannah reminded herself that giving up was never an option. She hurried toward her aging sedan parked near the edge of the lot. Thunder rumbled in the distance. Most people had already rushed home to escape the storm. That was when she noticed someone standing near the bus stop across the street. At first, she almost kept walking. The figure was partially hidden by the rain. Then a flash of lightning illuminated the sidewalk for a brief second. Hannah stopped. A man stood alone beside the shelter, soaked from head to toe. Something about the way he leaned against the structure suggested he was struggling. Hannah hesitated. She was tired. She wanted nothing more than to drive home and get a few hours of sleep before another busy day. Yet her mother had always taught her to pay attention when someone needed help. The lesson had stayed with her long after her mother's passing. Hannah crossed the street carefully, shielding her face from the rain. As she approached, the man looked up. He appeared to be in his early 40s, with dark hair plastered by the storm and a tired expression that revealed both discomfort and determination. "Are you okay?" Hannah asked. The stranger offered a polite smile. "I will be. Thank you." His voice sounded calm, but Hannah could see that he was shivering. "Do you have someone coming for you?" she asked. He glanced down the empty road. "Not yet." Hannah looked around. The street was nearly deserted. The rain showed no sign of stopping. "There is a 24-hour pharmacy about 2 miles from here," she said. "I can give you a ride if you need one." Surprise crossed the man's face. "You would do that for a stranger?" Hannah laughed softly. "Tonight, you look like someone who could use a little help." For the first time, a genuine smile appeared on his face. After a brief pause, he nodded. "Then thank you." Minutes later, they were driving through the storm. Neither realized that this simple act of kindness would become the beginning of a story that neither of them could have imagined. And as the man stepped out of her car near the pharmacy, something slipped unnoticed from his coat pocket onto the passenger seat, leaving behind the first clue to a mystery that would soon change Hannah's life forever. And as the man stepped out of her car near the pharmacy, something slipped unnoticed from his coat pocket onto the passenger seat, leaving behind the first clue to a mystery that would soon change Hannah's life forever. Hannah Brooks did not discover the item until she arrived home nearly 30 minutes later. The rain had finally begun to ease, and the small apartment she shared with Chloe felt warm compared to the storm outside. After checking on her sleeping daughter and placing tomorrow's school supplies neatly beside the kitchen table, Hannah returned to her car to retrieve her work bag. That was when she noticed a leather card holder resting on the passenger seat. She immediately recognized it as belonging to the stranger she had driven through the storm. Hannah picked it up and opened it carefully. Inside were several business cards, identification documents, and a photograph. She quickly closed it again, not wanting to invade someone's privacy. Yet one detail had already caught her attention. The name printed on the card was Daniel Carter. The name itself meant nothing to her. She placed the card holder on the kitchen counter and decided she would contact him the next day. The following morning moved at its usual hectic pace. Chloe nearly forgot part of her science project. Hannah rushed to help her gather materials before school. Then she squeezed in a few hours of sleep before preparing for another evening shift at the diner. Throughout the day, however, the lost card holder remained on her mind. Shortly after noon, she finally called the number listed on one of the cards. The call connected almost immediately. "This is Daniel Carter," a calm voice answered. Hannah smiled slightly. "I think I have something that belongs to you." Silence followed for a brief moment. Then she heard obvious relief in his voice. "The card holder?" "Yes." Daniel laughed softly. "I have been searching everywhere for it." Hannah explained how she had found it after dropping him off the previous night. Daniel thanked her repeatedly. You have already helped me once, he said. Now you are helping me again. They agreed to meet later that evening after Hannah finished work. At exactly 10 o'clock, Daniel arrived outside the diner. This time he looked completely different. He wore a neatly tailored coat and appeared far more rested than he had during the storm. Yet the warm smile was exactly the same. Hannah handed him the card holder. Everything should still be there. Daniel checked briefly before nodding. It is. Then he looked at her with genuine gratitude. You have no idea how important this is. Hannah shrugged. Anyone would have returned it. Daniel smiled. I'm not sure that is true. Before leaving, he surprised her with a small envelope. Hannah immediately shook her head. I cannot accept money. It is not money, Daniel replied. Curious, she opened it. Inside was a handwritten note thanking her for her kindness. Attached was a gift certificate to a local bookstore. My daughter loves reading, Hannah said. Then perhaps she will enjoy it, Daniel answered. The simple gesture touched her more than she expected. As they talked for a few more minutes, Hannah found herself relaxing around him. Daniel seemed thoughtful, respectful, and surprisingly easy to talk to. Eventually, he glanced at his watch. I should go. Then he hesitated. Would it be all right if I bought you a cup of coffee sometime as a proper thank you? Hannah almost declined. Life was busy. Money was tight. Free time barely existed. Yet something about Daniel's sincerity made her pause. Coffee sounds fine, she admitted. Daniel smiled. Good. As he walked away, neither of them noticed the old photograph tucked inside the returned card holder. A photograph connected to a woman from Hannah's past and a promise Daniel had carried for many years. As he walked away, neither of them noticed the old photograph tucked inside the returned card holder. A photograph connected to a woman from Hannah's past and a promise Daniel had carried for many years. 3 days later, Hannah Brooks found herself sitting across from Daniel Carter in a small cafe located near the town square. She still was not entirely sure why she had agreed to meet him. Life rarely left room for social plans. Between raising Chloe, working long shifts at the diner, and managing countless responsibilities, free time had become a luxury she could barely afford. Yet something about Daniel's quiet sincerity had made it difficult to refuse. The cafe was warm and inviting. Soft music played in the background while customers chatted over coffee and pastries. For the first few minutes, conversation remained light. They spoke about the weather, work, and small-town life. Hannah quickly discovered that Daniel possessed a natural ability to make people feel comfortable. He listened carefully and seemed genuinely interested in everything she shared. You work incredibly hard, Daniel observed after hearing about her schedule. Hannah laughed softly. Most parents do. Daniel smiled. Perhaps, but not everyone carries it as gracefully as you do. The compliment caught her off guard. She quickly changed the subject. What about you? What brings you to town? For a brief moment, Daniel hesitated. Business, he answered. And something personal. Hannah noticed the slight pause, but chose not to press further. Everyone had parts of their life they preferred to discuss on their own terms. As the conversation continued, Daniel asked about Chloe. Hannah's face immediately brightened. She spoke about her daughter's love of books, science projects, and endless curiosity about the world. Daniel listened attentively. She sounds remarkable, he said. She is, Hannah replied proudly. She makes every difficult day worth it. Daniel smiled, though something thoughtful flickered behind his eyes. Eventually, their conversation shifted toward family. Daniel asked whether Hannah had always lived in town. Most of my life, she said. My mother raised me here. Your mother? Daniel repeated. What was her name? Hannah stirred her coffee absent-mindedly. Margaret Brooks. The reaction was immediate. Daniel froze. For a second, he looked genuinely stunned. Hannah noticed instantly. Are you okay? Daniel blinked and forced a small smile. Yes. Yet his expression suggested otherwise. You said Margaret Brooks? Hannah nodded. You knew her? Daniel looked down at his cup. Several moments passed before he answered. Many years ago. Hannah felt curiosity growing. How? Daniel leaned back slowly. Your mother once helped someone who desperately needed help. Hannah smiled faintly. That sounds like her. Daniel returned the smile, but there was unmistakable emotion in his eyes. She had a gift for helping people. The conversation moved on, yet Hannah could not ignore the feeling that something important had just happened. Daniel clearly knew more than he was saying. When they finally left the cafe, Daniel walked her to her car. Before she climbed inside, he spoke again. Would you mind if we met again sometime? Hannah hesitated only briefly. I think that would be nice. Daniel smiled. Good. As she drove home, Hannah found herself thinking about the strange expression on his face when she mentioned her mother's name. Meanwhile, Daniel remained standing in the parking lot long after her car disappeared from view. For years, he had searched for the family of a woman who had changed his life. Now, entirely by chance, the daughter of that woman had appeared in front of him during a storm. And for the first time since arriving in town, Daniel realized that fate might be guiding him towards something far more important than he had ever expected. For years, he had searched for the family of a woman who had changed his life. Now, entirely by chance, the daughter of that woman had appeared in front of him during a storm. And for the first time since arriving in town, Daniel realized that fate might be guiding him towards something far more important than he had ever expected. The following week passed quickly for Hannah Brooks. Between long shifts at the diner and helping Chloe prepare for an upcoming school science fair, there was little time to think about anything else. Yet Daniel Carter remained on her mind more often than she expected. Their conversations had been easy and natural. More importantly, there was a kindness about him that felt genuine. One afternoon, while Hannah was helping Chloe organize materials for her project at the kitchen table, her phone rang. Daniel's name appeared on the screen. Hello. Hannah answered. I hope I am not interrupting, Daniel said. Not at all. Daniel hesitated briefly. I was wondering if you and Chloe might like to join me at the Community Fall Festival this Saturday. Hannah looked at her daughter, who immediately noticed the expression on her face. Who is it? Chloe whispered excitedly. Hannah smiled despite herself. What exactly does the festival involve? She asked. Daniel laughed softly. Food, games, local vendors, and a lot of families enjoying the weekend. Chloe's eyes widened hopefully. Hannah already knew what her answer would be. We would love to come. Saturday arrived with clear skies and crisp autumn air. The festival filled the town square with music, colorful decorations, and crowds of families. Chloe was thrilled from the moment they arrived. She raced from one activity to another while Hannah tried unsuccessfully to keep up. Daniel appeared a few minutes later carrying 3 cups of hot chocolate. I had a feeling we might need these, he said. The afternoon unfolded effortlessly. Chloe quickly became comfortable around Daniel. She showed him her favorite booths, challenged him to simple carnival games, and filled every quiet moment with questions. To Hannah's surprise, Daniel seemed to enjoy every second of it. He listened carefully to Chloe's stories and encouraged her enthusiasm without ever appearing distracted. At one point, while Chloe joined a group of children decorating pumpkins, Hannah and Daniel found themselves sitting together on a nearby bench. She is wonderful, Daniel said. Hannah smiled. She keeps me busy. Your mother would be proud of both of you. The comment caught Hannah's attention immediately. You really did know my mother well, did you not? Daniel nodded slowly. More than you realize. Hannah studied him carefully. Then tell me. For several seconds, Daniel remained silent. Finally, he reached into his coat pocket and removed an old photograph. Hannah instantly recognized the image. It showed her mother many years younger than she remembered. Standing beside Margaret Brooks was a teenage boy. Who was that? Hannah asked. Daniel looked directly at her. That was me. Hannah stared at the photograph in disbelief. Daniel smiled softly. Your mother helped me during one of the most difficult periods of my life. Hannah looked back at the image. Suddenly, countless questions flooded her mind. Why had her mother never mentioned him? What had happened between them? And why did Daniel seem so emotional whenever Margaret's name was mentioned? Before she could ask another question, Chloe came running back toward them carrying a decorated pumpkin and an enormous smile. The moment passed, but the mystery remained. Later that evening, after returning home, Hannah could not stop thinking about the photograph. Meanwhile, Daniel sat alone in his hotel room holding the same picture. He knew the time had finally come to tell Hannah the full truth about the promise he had made to her mother many years ago. He knew the time had finally come to tell Hannah the full truth about the promise he had made to her mother many years ago. 2 days later, Daniel Carter called and asked if they could meet. There was something different in his voice this time. It sounded more serious, more reflective. Hannah Brooks agreed without hesitation. Curiosity had been growing ever since the festival. She needed answers. They met at a quiet park overlooking a small lake on the edge of town. Autumn leaves drifted across the walking paths as families enjoyed the mild afternoon weather. Daniel arrived carrying a small envelope and the old photograph Hannah had seen at the festival. After exchanging greetings, They sat on a bench facing the water. For several moments, neither spoke. Finally, Daniel handed her the photograph again. "Your mother changed my life," he said softly. Hannah looked down at the image. "You said that before." Daniel nodded. "Today I want to explain how." He took a slow breath. "When I was 19, I was completely lost. I had dreams, but I had no direction. I worked odd jobs, moved from place to place, and spent most days wondering whether I would ever build a future worth believing in." Hannah listened quietly. "Then I met Margaret Brooks." A smile appeared on his face. "She volunteered at a community outreach center. Most people pass through that building without being noticed. Your mother noticed everyone." Hannah felt emotion rising in her chest. The description sounded exactly like the woman she remembered. Daniel continued. "She encouraged me when I had almost stopped believing in myself. She listened. She challenged me. She reminded me that circumstances do not define who you become." Hannah looked out across the lake. She could almost hear her mother's voice saying those same words. "One afternoon," Daniel said, "I told her that if I ever became successful, I would find a way to repay her kindness." Hannah smiled faintly. "Let me guess. She told you that was not necessary." Daniel laughed. "Exactly." Then his expression became more serious. "But before I left town, I made her a promise anyway." He opened the envelope and carefully removed a folded letter. Hannah immediately recognized the handwriting. Her heart skipped. "That is my mother's writing." Daniel nodded. "She gave me this several years later." Hannah accepted the letter with trembling hands. The paper showed signs of age, but the words remained clear. As she began reading, tears slowly formed in her eyes. Margaret wrote about kindness, gratitude, and the importance of helping others whenever possible. Near the end, one passage stood out. "If life ever brings you back to this town, check on Hannah. She will never ask for help, even when she needs it." Daniel watched silently as Hannah finished reading. "I never forgot those words," he said. "When I learned your mother had passed away, I spent years trying to locate you. Not because she asked me to solve your problems. She never would have wanted that. I simply wanted to keep my promise." Hannah carefully folded the letter. For several seconds, emotion prevented her from speaking. Eventually she looked up. "You searched for me all these years." Daniel nodded. "Yes." Hannah could hardly process it. The idea that someone had carried her mother's request for so long felt overwhelming. Yet one question still remained unanswered. "What happened after you left town?" she asked. Daniel smiled thoughtfully. "That is a much longer story." Then his expression shifted. "One that explains why I was standing alone in the rain the night we met." Hannah sensed another layer of mystery waiting to be revealed. What she did not yet realize was that Daniel's story would soon expose a truth far bigger than anything she had imagined. What she did not yet realize was that Daniel's story would soon expose a truth far bigger than anything she had imagined. After leaving the park, Hannah Brooks spent the rest of the evening thinking about her mother's letter. She read it several times after Chloe went to bed. Every sentence felt like a conversation reaching across the years. Margaret Brooks had always believed that kindness created connections people could not always see immediately. Now Hannah was beginning to understand exactly what her mother meant. The following afternoon, Daniel Carter invited her to lunch. "I owe you the rest of the story," he said over the phone. Hannah agreed. They met at a quiet restaurant overlooking the river. Once they were seated, Daniel seemed unusually thoughtful. For several moments, he simply stared out the window before finally speaking. "After I left town, I followed the advice your mother gave me." Hannah smiled. "And what advice was that?" Daniel laughed softly. "Work hard. Stay honest. Never forget the people who help you." Hannah could almost hear Margaret saying those words. Daniel continued. "At first, nothing happened quickly. I worked long hours. I made mistakes. I failed more times than I succeeded." He paused. But eventually, opportunities started appearing. Over the next hour, Daniel described the journey that followed. He launched a small business with two friends. The first company struggled. The second failed completely. Yet each setback taught him something valuable. Years later, he started another venture. This time things were different. Growth came slowly at first, and then accelerated beyond anything he had imagined. Hannah listened carefully. The story sounded impressive, but Daniel spoke about it with remarkable humility. He focused less on financial success and more on the lessons learned along the way. Finally, Hannah asked the question she had been carrying since the beginning. "What exactly do you do now?" Daniel smiled. "That is the part one usually avoid discussing." Why? Because people often stop seeing me after they hear the answer. Hannah looked confused. Daniel reached into his briefcase and placed a magazine on the table. The cover featured his photograph. Hannah stared at it in disbelief. Beneath the image was a headline about one of the most successful technology companies in the country. Daniel Carter, founder and chief executive officer. Hannah looked from the magazine back to Daniel. This is you. Daniel nodded. Yes. For several seconds, she could not speak. Suddenly, countless details made sense. The expensive clothing, the confidence, the mysterious business trips. Yet nothing about his personality had prepared her for this revelation. You own that company? Hannah finally asked. Daniel smiled awkwardly. Among other things. Hannah sat back in her chair. She had expected success. She had not expected this. Daniel watched her reaction carefully. This is why I rarely tell people. Why? Hannah asked. Because everything changes afterward. His answer carried more sadness than pride. Hannah thought about the man she had met in the rain. The man who listened patiently to Chloe. The man who had carried her mother's letter for years. None of those things had changed. Simply because she now knew more about his career. It does not change who you are, she said quietly. Relief appeared on Daniel's face. Thank you. Yet despite her words, Hannah could not ignore a new concern growing inside her. Their lives suddenly seemed worlds apart. She worked double shifts to support her daughter. Daniel led a company recognized across the country. As lunch ended, Hannah remained thoughtful. Daniel noticed, but did not pressure her. He understood that some truths required time. What neither of them realized was that the biggest challenge ahead would not come from secrets or promises. It would come from deciding whether two people from completely different worlds could trust what was beginning to grow between them. What neither of them realized was that the biggest challenge ahead would not come from secrets or promises. It would come from deciding whether two people from completely different worlds could trust what was beginning to grow between them. During the weeks that followed, Hannah Brooks tried to convince herself that Daniel Carter's success did not matter. Yet the revelation lingered in her thoughts. Every time she saw another article mentioning his company or heard someone discussing one of his business achievements, she became more aware of the enormous difference between their lives. Daniel, however, behaved exactly as he always had. He continued calling to ask how Chloe's science fair preparations were progressing. He stopped by the diner occasionally for coffee. He never mentioned wealth, business rankings, or corporate accomplishments unless Hannah asked directly. The consistency of his behavior slowly reassured her. One Saturday morning, Daniel invited Hannah and Chloe to attend a community literacy event sponsored by his foundation. Chloe immediately accepted on behalf of both of them before Hannah could answer. The event was held at a renovated public library in a neighboring town. Families filled the building, children explored reading stations, and volunteers distributed books to students. Hannah quickly noticed that Daniel seemed completely at ease there. He spent most of the morning speaking with families, listening to teachers, and encouraging young readers. More than once she saw children approach him without hesitation. He greeted every one of them with patience and enthusiasm. At one point, Chloe disappeared into a group activity focused on creative writing. Hannah and Daniel found themselves standing near a display of children's books. You do this often? Hannah asked. Daniel nodded. Whenever I can. Why literacy programs? Daniel smiled. Because someone once taught me that education creates opportunities that circumstances cannot take away. Hannah immediately recognized the influence of her mother in those words. Later that afternoon, while Chloe participated in a storytelling competition, Hannah observed Daniel interacting with dozens of people. Something became increasingly clear. Despite his success, he never seemed interested in attention. He appeared far more interested in helping others succeed. On the drive home, Chloe could barely contain her excitement. She talked nonstop about the event and the friends she had made. Finally, she looked at Hannah from the back seat. I really like Daniel. Hannah smiled. I know. Chloe grinned. I think Grandma would have liked him too. The comment surprised Hannah. Yet the more she thought about it, the more she believed her daughter might be right. Over the next month, Daniel gradually became a familiar presence in their lives. He attended Chloe's science fair presentation. He helped organize a fundraiser for the community center where Margaret Brooks had once volunteered. He even spent an entire afternoon helping Chloe build a model bridge for a school project after Hannah was called into an extra shift at work. Watching the bond develop between Daniel and her daughter stirred emotions Hannah had not expected. For years, every responsibility had rested entirely on her shoulders. Now someone else was showing up consistently without being asked. One evening after Daniel left, Chloe sat beside Hannah on the couch. "Can I tell you something?" she asked. Hannah nodded. "Of course." Chloe smiled knowingly. "You are happier when he is around." Hannah laughed nervously. "That is a very big observation." "It is true," Chloe replied. Then she added something that stayed with Hannah long after the conversation ended. "He looks happy when he is with us too." Later that night, as rain gently tapped against the apartment windows, Hannah found herself reflecting on everything that had happened since that stormy evening outside the diner. What had begun as a simple act of kindness was slowly becoming something much deeper. And for the first time, she could no longer deny that her feelings for Daniel were growing stronger with every passing day. And for the first time, she could no longer deny that her feelings for Daniel were growing stronger with every passing day. The realization should have brought comfort, yet instead it filled Hannah Brooks with uncertainty. For years, her world had been simple, even when it was difficult. Every decision centered on Chloe. Every plan revolved around paying bills, managing schedules, and creating a stable life for her daughter. Now, for the first time since becoming a single mother, someone had entered that carefully balanced world. And that someone happened to be a man whose life seemed impossibly different from her own. The following week, Daniel Carter invited Hannah and Chloe to attend the grand reopening of the community center where Margaret Brooks had volunteered years earlier. The building had recently been renovated through a charitable partnership funded by Daniel's foundation. Hannah initially hesitated. Events connected to Daniel's public work always reminded her of the gap between their circumstances. Still, the center held special meaning because of her mother. She decided to go. When they arrived, the building looked transformed. Fresh paint, new classrooms, updated technology, and expanded programs had created opportunities for local families that had not existed before. Hannah watched children exploring the facility with excitement. She could easily imagine how much her mother would have loved seeing it. During the ceremony, several speakers praised the generosity that made the renovation possible. Daniel accepted every compliment graciously, but redirected attention toward the volunteers and community leaders who had supported the project. The more Hannah observed him, the more she realized that his success had not changed the values Margaret Brooks once encouraged in him. Later that afternoon, after Chloe joined a youth activity inside the center, Hannah and Daniel walked through a quiet garden behind the building. Autumn sunlight filtered through colorful leaves as they followed a winding path. For a while, neither spoke. Finally, Hannah broke the silence. "Can I ask you something honestly?" Daniel nodded. "Always." She took a deep breath. "Do you ever wonder whether this makes sense?" Daniel smiled slightly. "You may need to be more specific." Hannah laughed nervously. "Us." Daniel stopped walking. "All the time." His answer surprised her. "You do?" "Of course." He looked toward the garden before continuing. "You see our differences." "I see them too." Hannah folded her arms. "Then why does it not seem to bother you?" Daniel met her eyes. "Because every important thing about you has nothing to do with money." The sincerity in his voice left her speechless. Daniel continued gently. "You are strong. You are kind. You love your daughter with everything you have. Those are the reasons I admire you." Hannah looked away, overwhelmed by emotion. For months, she had worried that eventually reality would interfere with whatever was growing between them. Yet Daniel seemed far less concerned about status than she was. "I am afraid," she admitted quietly. "Of what?" "Of building something and discovering it cannot work." Daniel considered her words carefully. "I cannot promise that life will always be easy." Then he smiled softly. "But I can promise that what matters to me is standing right here." For several moments, neither moved. The distance between them felt smaller than it ever had before. Yet before Hannah could respond, Chloe came running toward them from across the garden with exciting news about a program she wanted to join. The moment passed, but the feelings remained. That evening, after returning home, Hannah sat alone with her mother's letter once again. As she reread Margaret's words, one sentence seemed to stand out more clearly than ever before. "Sometimes the greatest opportunities arrive disguised as unexpected people." For the first time, Hannah wondered whether she had been focusing on the wrong question all along. Instead of asking whether their different worlds could fit together, perhaps she should have been asking whether she was finally ready to believe she deserved happiness. Instead of asking whether their different worlds could fit together, Perhaps she should have been asking whether she was finally ready to believe she deserved happiness. The months that followed brought changes neither Hannah Brooks nor Daniel Carter could have predicted on that rainy night outside the diner. Some changes arrived quietly. Others became impossible to ignore. Yet all of them seemed connected to one simple decision made during a storm. By the beginning of the following autumn, Daniel had become an important part of Hannah and Chloe's lives. Not because of his success or resources, but because he consistently showed up when it mattered. He attended school events. He remembered important dates. He listened when someone needed encouragement. Most importantly, he never treated their relationship as a problem to solve. He treated it as something worth nurturing every day. One Saturday afternoon, Daniel invited Hannah and Chloe to visit the community center once again. The building had become a thriving place for local families. New programs were helping children, job seekers, and senior citizens throughout the region. As they walked through the center, Hannah noticed a crowd gathering in the main hall. Curious, she followed Daniel inside. At the front of the room stood a newly installed plaque covered by a small curtain. Community leaders, volunteers, and residents filled the space with anticipation. Daniel stepped forward and addressed the audience. Many years ago, this community was shaped by people who believed that kindness matters, he said. One person in particular changed countless lives without ever asking for recognition. Hannah immediately thought of her mother. Daniel continued, "Today we honor that legacy." He gently pulled the curtain aside. Tears instantly filled Hannah's eyes. The plaque displayed a dedication to Margaret Brooks. Beneath her name appeared a simple message. Her kindness created opportunities that continue to change lives. For a moment, the room disappeared around Hannah. She thought about her mother volunteering after long days of work. She remembered countless lessons about compassion, responsibility, and helping others whenever possible. Most of all, she thought about the chain of events that had started decades earlier when Margaret encouraged a struggling young man to believe in himself. Daniel stepped beside her. "She deserved to be remembered," he said quietly. Hannah nodded through tears. She would have been embarrassed by all this. Daniel laughed softly. "Probably." The crowd applauded as community members shared stories about Margaret's influence. Standing beside Daniel and Chloe, Hannah felt a deep sense of peace she had not experienced in years. Later that evening, after the ceremony ended, the three of them walked outside together. A gentle rain had begun to fall. Chloe looked up at the sky and smiled. "It is raining again." Hannah exchanged a glance with Daniel. Both immediately remembered the night that had brought them together. "That rain turned out to be pretty important," Daniel said. Hannah smiled. "I think you are right." Chloe looked between them curiously. "What are you talking about?" Daniel laughed. "A very long story." They continued walking through the light rain toward the parking lot. Daniel reached for Hannah's hand, and this time she did not hesitate. As they walked together, Hannah realized that her life had changed forever after that storm. Not because a successful man entered her world. Not because of unexpected opportunities. Not even because of the promise her mother left behind. Her life changed because one act of kindness connected people whose paths were meant to cross. And as she looked at Daniel and Chloe beside her, Hannah understood something her mother had known all along. The most meaningful gifts often